All right, now for our fourth and final video of the week. Hallelujah, right? So I do want to just make sure everybody is aware that prompting hierarchies can look different. For example, if you were working with a student on answering comprehension questions about a text you've read aloud, for example, this is what a prompting hierarchy might look like, and it may not look like a physical prompt, visual prompt, etc. It may look like the first level of your prompting is that you reread the whole excerpt. For example, the whole paragraph where the answer can be found. And then your next level of prompting is that you reread the sentence in which the answer can be found. The third level might be that you model the exact answer, and if the student still does not respond correctly, then you would provide a physical prompt. So again, just a reminder that prompting hierarchies can look different because they're individualized for our students. So what I want you to do now is I want you to stop the video for just a second and I want you to think what might be advantages and disadvantages of using the system of least prompts. And again, you know that we have this think, pair, share here because that would be if we were in person for the in-person course. So again, stop the video and just do a quick write on what might be the advantages and disadvantages of using this system of least prompts, and you will upload this to Canvas for the week. All right, see you in a second. All right, so let's talk about what some of those advantages may be. So one advantage is that the student only gets the assistance when they need it. If they can perform the skill independently, we let them perform the skill. If they only need a visual prompt, we only give them a visual prompt. So it's only the amount of assistance that is absolutely needed to perform the skill correctly. Again, students first get the opportunity to perform the skill independently before we give them any type of prompt, and it allows students who never reach independence to still make progress. Because if you were to collect data only on did they perform the skill correctly or not with no level of prompting, there are some students for whom we might never see progress because all of our students don't reach independence. Some students are partially participating, and we still want to see that progress on or related to the amount of assistance they need. So what we may see is the amount of assistance decreases over time. So there might be something like students out of seat behavior. That's what we want. We want to see a decrease over time. But we don't want to forget how important it is that students participate to the highest degree they possibly can with the minimal or the least amount of support needed. And so partial participation, it is the goal for some of our students. That is the goal for some of our students, at least for now, right? Ultimately, we hope and work towards independence, but if they're only at partial participation, we want to be able to see that progress. We already talked about that. Another thing is that the system of least prompts is really easy to implement. Again, it's something you can teach your classroom paraprofessionals, you can teach your peer mentors, you can teach it to parents, and research has indicated that it has been successfully taught and implemented by a wide variety of implementers. But I do want to say that there are some disadvantages as well. One of them is that the student might be able to make an error. We want to try to interrupt or we want errorless learning, but that's why we call it near errorless. Errorless or near errorless is because there is a possibility that a student would make an error before we're able to prompt them. Another thing is it might be time consuming. And so I want you to stop the video and I want you to think about why might it be time consuming and just do a quick write on what might be time consuming about it and then come right back, okay? All right. So I look forward to seeing your answers in class on Monday. So again, doing a check-in, how's everybody feeling about system of least prompts at this point? And if you have any questions, just make sure you let me know. I also want to make sure you can email questions to me as well. I'm happy to reach out to you and again, happy to schedule a Zoom meeting at any time if needed. You all read a wonderful article on the system of least prompts by Alt and Griffin. And these are two forerunners in the area for this instructional strategy, again, which is an evidence-based practice. And so, one of the things that they talked about was data collection and data graphing. And so, what we're going to do now is we are going to look at three different options for data collection for the system of least prompts. And so there are a couple of ways you can do it. One is you can indicate the prompt level needed. And so you might write something like an I for independent, a V for verbal, a G for gesture. So you might just indicate what level prompt was required. You might have a data sheet that you can just circle the prompting level from a list. Or you may have like a check off where you're going to check off under a column. And again, these were in your reading, but we're going to look at them more closely in just a second. Um, and again, one of the reasons we want to make sure that we are collecting data on the prompting level required is because some of our students are not going to become independent. And so we need to make sure that we can show, for example, if you're having a parent-teacher conference, that over time, students are requiring less and less and less intrusive levels of assistance. So here is one of the examples of data collection. And in this one, this is the one where you indicate the prompt level. So you can see that the student wrote their name independently, and then here's our key down on the bottom. They wrote their address with physical guidance. They wrote their phone number with a verbal prompt. Well, let's think about this. What are your thoughts on this? Can you think of any advantages and disadvantages of this type of data collection? Well, one of the disadvantages is that you can only see one day or one trial at a time. So I can see only how the student did on this instructional session. I can't see a trial before this. I can't see how they did yesterday or the day before. So that's a very disadvantage because it's a very narrow view of the student's performance. And it also makes that progress monitoring much, much more difficult unless you're graphing it. If you're graphing it, it makes it easier. But just as written, yeah, this can make progress monitoring pretty difficult. Another one is circling the prompt level on a list of prompts. And so this would be something that you've prepared ahead of time and you just need to go in and circle. So what might be advantages and disadvantages of this? All right, so when we're thinking about advantages and disadvantages, this is what's known as data clutter. If you look at that, that's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. Visually, it is a lot of stuff. And so, yeah, this is called data clutter. And data clutter causes reduced readability. That's more difficult to read, for example, than the one we looked at previously. It gives you a very, again, limited perspective because I'm only seeing, let's see, in this one, it could be that I'm seeing possibly, it looks like possibly it could be three, four trials, but that's still very limited. This might be what the student did across a week, for example. And it's difficult to identify any kind of anomalies because, again, I'm seeing a very limited and isolated amount of data. Again, unless I was graphing it, we're talking about as it's written. Another one is that you would check off the prompting level under a labeled column. And so this one again, you can see independent, verbal, model, and then physical, and you're just kind of checking it off, or in this case, they're doing X's underneath. So when we're thinking about advantages and disadvantages, very similar to ones we've discussed before, is that there's the data clutter. It's difficult to see. It's only 4 days trial. It's very limited. Um, so, before we move forward and talk about graphing, I want your thoughts on the data sheets. Have you seen similar data sheets in your, here it says clinical settings, that could be practicum, in your classroom settings or in your practicum settings? We called them clinical settings at my other university. So, yeah, in your practicum or in your classroom, have you seen any data sheets that are similar to these? So you can just stop this and think about it. This is just thoughts. This is not something that you have to write down, but it's just kind of getting an idea of of what you're using in your classrooms or have seen used in your classrooms. So I do want to say that while those data sheets were somewhat cluttered, if you were graphing that data, it would be very easy to see how the student was progressing. And here is an example of a data sheet for the system of least prompts that you can find on Canvas. And again, here for phase, you would put like, was it baseline? Is it where you're trying to find out where the student is performing now? Or is it as you've already moved into intervention and you're actually teaching the student? And so if you were doing a task analysis and you only had 4 steps, you would list the steps here, or each of these could be a trial perhaps, depending on what you're scoring a student on. But you might have to add lines to that, right? What if it's a 6-step task analysis? But again, this data sheet is available to you on Canvas. And so what we're going to be doing in class, we're not going to do it now, but just kind of letting you know, is that we are going to go through some videos and we are going to collect data. Do not look at the PowerPoint to get the answers, because what we really want you to do, you can see that they're in there when we talk about it, but what we really want you to do is that we want you to be doing this as we're working on it, because I want you to look at the videos and collect data. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to put you into after we do collect the data, going to put you into breakout groups and have you compare your data with a friend. Okay? So when we're thinking about graphing data for the system of least prompts, it's important that we indicate independent responses. Those count towards criterion if that is what your IEP goal says. So if it says that a student will identify the numbers 1 through 10 with 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive data sessions, we're really looking at independent responses. So you want to make sure that you indicate when students are responding independently. You have a different choices of ways you can graph data for the system of least prompts. You can graph it by the level of assistance. And so what you'll do is you would create different graphs. This is one way for each of the levels. So here's my graph for verbal prompting. Here's my graph for gestures. Here's my graph for modeling. That's a lot. I'm just going to tell you as a teacher, I'm going to be very real for you. That's a lot. Or you could have different types of data points on the same graph or different colored data lines that indicate different prompting levels. So it might be that, a verbal prompt is blue or it's a circle, and then a gesture is green or it's a square. So you could use different indicators of what the different data points were. So we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of different types of data. And so as we're looking at these, I want you to think as a teacher, what would be some of the pros and cons of you using these? So here's an example of where you're only graphing independent responses. So here's where the student was in baseline, and we can see that once intervention was implemented, they started to make some progress. They dip down a little, and then they're kind of starting to move back up and have stabilized. And this is the graph that you will use most often. And there's the data sheet with the task analysis. All right, thinking again about your pros and cons. Here is another one. When independent data doesn't show up initially, you may want to decide that you're going to use a different graphing. And so here, this is an alternate graphing method. And so what we're graphing here is we might be graphing, let's see, this is where we're not getting it independently, but we're graphing the number. So for each of these, we can see that an independent response gets 3 points, a verbal prompt gets 2 points. And so what we've done is we've taken this data and we've turned it into a point system. And here we can tell what the points were for each of the individual sessions. And over time, the student is getting more of those steps independently, getting more, they're moving closer to independence, but that is only being shown by the total number of points the student gets, again, with a point designation down here. All right, let's keep going. This is another one when we don't have independent data showing. And I'll tell you, I think this is overwhelming. I don't encourage you to use this, although if you find it beneficial, you can. And this is where each of these different symbols, so an open circle, a square, a closed circle, a triangle, each one of those stands for a different type of prompting level. I talk about clutter. To me, that's clutter. That's very difficult for me to follow. So I don't encourage that. But if you find it useful, please use it. And so I just want you to think for a minute. Could you teach the system of least prompts if you were teaching virtually? Because that's what we're doing now, right? We're teaching virtually. And there are many school districts that do go virtual. Let's say that there's a big snowstorm, and instead of closing school, you just move to virtual teaching. So could you teach remotely using the system of least prompts? Stop and think about it. This is something just to think about, not something to write about. Well, if you could, if you had a coach. I want you to think. If you had a coach on the other side helping the student, yeah, you could absolutely use the system of least prompts. You could do it one of two ways. You could hold a training session ahead of time where you taught them how to use the system of least prompts before instruction, or you could also, sorry about that, you could also coach them virtually as they're working with the students. For example, I could coach you right now through the system of least prompts with a student if you were working with them on the other end. So you would need a co-teacher, or you could act as the coach, as I was just saying. All right, quick self-evaluation to see how you're feeling about the system of least prompts. Make sure you let me know if you need any support or if you have any questions. We are going to talk about this more in class on Monday. So if that doesn't clear things up with you, please schedule a meeting with me. I'm happy to meet with you at whatever time you need. All you need to do is let me know and make sure you let me know what your questions are. All right, everybody, I'll see you in class. I hope you have a phenomenal evening. See you soon.